All right. Well, let's get started. I anticipate we'll have some people still join, but this is Sunstone HR's Connected Leadership webinar series, Building the Future Together. As we thought about what we could offer in these webinars, we there's so many things. Every one of us in a leadership position needs development, especially if we're growing internally and promoting people internally. And so our goal around these monthly webinars is the development of each of us in a leadership management or even in a human resources type of a role. It's about managing people, handling people matters, and becoming stronger in what we do. Um, so we'll do this every month, the first Monday of every month. And let's go to the next slide, Julie. So next month, it's on December 1st, I will be presenting the real reason your employees are leaving and what you can do about it. So hopefully that's an intriguing title. You'll join us again and share the word out. These are free. Again, I've got a great team here at Sunstone HR, decades and decades of leadership experience, coaching, and management. We're excited to be sharing these insights with you. Today, our we're going to be facilitated by Julie, and she's got a performance management tip for us that we can introduce or we can implement immediately. So, Julie, without further discussion for me, the meeting's yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Rod. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. I'm excited to spend the next little bit with you. We are going to be talking about EFOSA. This is one of my favorite performance management tools. Just for lack of time, because I don't want to go over the hour, I'm not going to go into the history of where EFOSA came from, but I actually learned it a decade or more ago at a SHRM chapter meeting. So I have implemented it in all the places I've worked and with all the companies that I've supported and consulted. So let's first talk about what EFOSA is. It is a framework that you follow. It is an acronym. And the first thing it does is it creates and helps you craft proper documentation. And we'll talk about that, why we need that documentation here in just a second. And then the second thing it does is it helps craft a conversation, both if you're giving a coaching or if you're giving corrective feedback, which sometimes are married and live together and feel the same. But I know as leaders, one of the things that as a leadership coach and leadership trainer, one of the things that leaders most fear about giving critical feedback or course correction or even a documented discussion or whatever that, a first warning or whatever that looks like, it's what to say. I don't know what to say. And that's where they get in the biggest trouble, is when we have leaders who don't know what to say. So that's one of the beautiful things about this. Not only does it give us a really great complete documentation that we'll use, but it also allows us to craft this a conversation. It gives you like a script that you can follow, which is really awesome. So let's first talk about, of course, we're HR professionals, but why do we need documentation? And I have the chat open, so feel free to throw into chat, if you will, why do we need to document conversations like this? What are some of the reasons that we would want to have this conversation? And I have four, there may be others, so I'll give you just a minute to put that in the chat. Don't everybody do it at once. I mean, you'll all do it right now, so at once. You're certainly welcome to unmute if you want and just shout it out if you'd rather not chat. But Stephanie, perfect. We need to have it in writing. Yep. For both the employer and the employee, right? There's a paper trail. This shows that you spoke. Yes, that creates clarification. Accountability. Yes, good, good. What happens if we end up in an unemployment dispute? Or we have a wrongful termination claim, right? We need these documents mainly for legal reasons. There's a reason to have some of those things. There's another perspective that helps leaders, if we have documentation of stuff, it helps us be more objective and fair so that we can be like, oh, I keep writing up Bob for this, but I never write up, Sally for this. the same thing, right? Or we see those same behaviors. So it helps keep leaders objective and fair. It also helps ensure that all organizational leaders are consistent, that not just this team is doing it or this department, that it helps from an HR perspective, make sure everybody's holding everybody to the same accountability level. Absolutely. And then the last one, which you guys hit on, right? It helps the employee understand the gap or the concern and how to resolve the problem. So they're feeling it officially, that it becomes, it is documented and it is what it is, right? It creates that accountability, the paper trail, right? And we have it in writing that we can look at. Now, before we step in and we address a problem with a team member, there's a couple things that I want you to think about and do. Especially if you're building a case for termination, and this tool works for that as well. But before we step into that, we want to make sure that we have provided all the appropriate and necessary training. And we've provided all the necessary and proper tools and resources. We can't hold someone accountable to a process or an expectation if they don't know what that process is or how to use that tool or what that expectation is, right? I use the example all the time that if I give you a bow and an arrow and I tell you to shoot, right? Shoot the arrow, but I never tell you where the target is, where are you going to aim? And honestly, only I can be blamed if you shoot me, right? If I get hit with the arrow, that, right? And sometimes that's what happens. We get shot because we did not set the proper expectations. So we need to make sure that we do that. We've provided clear and complete instructions as well. So they know exactly, again, those expectations are what they know what they're supposed to do. And then the last one is, we've investigated the situation. We've gathered complete and accurate information. We can't step in and say, hey, Stephanie, I understand that you did or didn't do something. And you're like, yes, I did, or no, I didn't, right? We need to make sure that we have all the information before we step in and have these conversations, especially if we're going to hold someone accountable in a way that would lead to a termination of sorts. So let's talk about, this is what EFOSA stands for, and we'll walk through this. So the E is for expectations. And I will have a handout that we'll email out after if you don't get it all written down, but we'll definitely share that. The F is for facts. The O is for outcome or objectives, and you can use both or either, depending on the situation. The S is for solutions. And then the A is for actions. And we're going to break down and talk about each one of these as we move forward. So let's go to E as expectations. And we sort of just already talked this, prep this just a little bit, but how do we are going to start with, this is what is expected of our employees. And it is, what does your employee need to do? What do you want them to do? How do you want them to go about it, right? It's not like you just have to give good customer service. Okay, that's pretty vague. We want it to be as specific as possible. So this is how you give good customer service. You're expected to give customer service in this way, this shape or form, right? How we want our employees to do it. And also there's some space where it's, what do we want our employees not to do, right? You can't hit each other, right? You can't be in a fight and punch your coworker, right? I always use that one, like no hitting coworkers, right? Those are things we don't want our employees to do, right? So think about, and then maybe throw in the chat, how do we communicate and confirm understanding of expectations? How do we let our employees know what's expected of them? What does that look like in the workplace? Again, throw those in chat. Yeah, KPIs, good. That's definitely one, right? What are our goals? What are we working toward? Those align expectations. How else do we educate, if you will, our employees on what's expected of them? Oh, training. Yep, definitely. Onboarding, policies, right? Our handbook, all of those things. are a space where expectations show up, right? Company norms, the things we do by example, right? If it's okay to show up in a meeting and bring your laptop, because, and you can work away while you're at meetings, then, right, if that's what your leader does, then absolutely, that becomes the norm, and that can be, what's acceptable, right? Yeah, and that's how we communicate. Communication is a great one, right? Just the things that we say, the things that we talk about, the meeting agendas, all those things align for what's expected for our employees. So again, if I'm giving you a bow and an arrow, the expectation is I want you to hit the target. Where is that target? So that's what it is. So we're going to build an example as we go through this. So if we start with E, and our situation is Bob is late for work. I always pick on Bob. I don't even know Bob, but anyway, Bob is late for work. So if we're going to start this, not only the documentation or the script, what are we going to say? So the expectation, Bob, you are expected to be at your desk, ready to work by 8 a.m. every day that you're scheduled, right? We can't just say, hey, Bob, you're expected to be on time. It's helpful if we have all of the little details inside of that, okay? So that's how we would start a conversation. That's how we would start the documentation. What is expected of Bob? And we're going to reiterate now. Bob should already know this. If Bob doesn't know this, we're in trouble, all right? And maybe that's a good place for us to make sure Bob knows. Has Bob been trained? Does Bob understand the expectation? Has he agreed? Is there alignment there? For sure. Okay, let's move on to the F. F is for facts. Facts are indisputable truths, right? And facts can be verified. If I said to you, Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, right? Which is their marketing ploy. I don't think they use it anymore, but they used to, right? And I went to Disneyland and I saw a lot of unhappy people, kids and parents alike, crying, right? That is maybe not the happiest place on earth. That is opinion, right? And facts are different from emotions or opinions, and you have to sort of pull those things apart and pull out the factual things, right? Somebody could step into my office and say, right, Bob's boss could be like, oh my heck, Bob is the laziest employee. He never does anything he's supposed to. And right. And all of a sudden I think Bob is a terrible employee. But really, when in fact is Bob's just late, right? But we're getting the emotion and the opinion from the leader versus what are the facts. And so we need to drill down to the facts that show up. So, and it does take practice to separate those facts from the perceptions that show up. So I have, we're going to do a little game. So get ready to, again, in chat, y'all. I don't want it to just be Amy answering here. But I want you to guess what kind of car I drive, okay? I'm going to describe it for you, and you tell me if you what kind of car I'm driving. So as soon as you think you know what it is, let me know. So it's a really great car. It is actually a really cool color. The inside is stylish and very comfortable. It is foreign made and sporty. It drives really smooth and actually really fast, which is dangerous for me. A lot of people would actually be able to afford this car. So it's very affordable. And if you drove, and that's a Porsche, nope, right. If you drove this car, every day would feel like you were in a parade, right? Okay, what kind of car do I drive? Okay, I do drive a white Cherokee, but that's not the car I'm looking for. But anyway, it's not fair that that person knows me. Okay, that's not what I'm looking for. Maybe what kind of car am I describing here? So I'm surprised you all didn't know exactly what kind of car I was talking about. I mean, I gave you all kinds of facts, or did I? Right? I think I gave you one fact, right? That it was foreign, right? Yeah, those facts go with a lot of different cars, absolutely. And every time I do this, everybody is like this or that or this or that, right? So really, and I usually am holding the car, but it's in my bag. I actually can get it out. It's one of those weird things that rides around with me all the time, but it is I should have gotten it out of my bag before we started this. I apologize. My plan was not to dig it out of my bag in the middle of all of this. Okay. But it is a little yellow Volkswagen Bug. That's what I was going for, right? So it's so easy to think I'm speaking facts when in fact I'm not giving you any facts at all, right? It felt factual to me. So this is again one of those spaces where we have to figure out, are we just speaking in general terms or emotions or speculation or perceptions? How do we get down to the facts of what's going on? So let's take it back to our scenario. So Bob's late for work. We started with the expectations. Bob, you're expected to be at your desk ready to work by 8 o'clock. Here's the facts. You were late today, yesterday, and 3 days last week. Because if I said to Bob, hey, Bob, you're late all the time. Bob, you're always late. Bob could say, well, I wasn't late yesterday, right? Or, you know, last week or right, whatever. And all of a sudden, my statement, my validity is gone. So we want to speak in facts. You were late today, yesterday, and 3 days last week, right? So those are the facts that we're going to present. So we've set the expectation. Hey, Bob, this is what's expected. Facts. Here's the days that you were late. And maybe we want to say you were late by like more than 10 minutes because there's a little bit of buffer and I'm cool with that. But maybe when does it start to become, right, a problem is when we're going to want to document that. Okay. All right. So we have our expectations. We have our facts. Let's move into our O in our EFOSA for outcomes and objectives. So this is where we're going to talk about the results or the consequences of this behavior. What is that new expectation that we want? So Bob, if you're late, here's when you're supposed to be here. Here's all the times you're late. This is now what I expect of you. The objective is sort of the new behavior, right? The new expectation. Now, in a lot of cases, that's the same. It doesn't differ, right? It can't be like, hey, Bob, you punched Joe, and so our new expectation is maybe you try not to, right? Maybe you only hit one person a day, or you know what I mean, right? Sometimes it's black and white. It's like you can't punch people, and the expectation is that will never happen again, right? It's pretty cut and dry. Sometimes there's a space where if we're talking about performance expectations, and I've worked in different production settings where there's an expectation of widgets per hour, right? So it's like, hey, Bob, you're supposed to make 10 widgets per hour, and right now you're only making 6. So let's try to work towards getting to 8, right? And we're going to work on that for a month. And then we'll readdress and we'll move, and right? So we're going to set some incremental improvements. That could also be part of the new objective if needs be. If it's black or white, then it's right, it is what it is. But this is also a good space to include, right, the outcome. What happens because you're not doing those behaviors or you are doing the behaviors that we would expect. Why that behavior is important is a good place here, right? So we'll build this into our practice, but it does allow the employee to have really good clarification on what they need to do and what they need to not do, right? Or prevent this from happening again, right? If this is an expectation and it needs to happen, and if that isn't met, then what is going to happen, right? Where are we going to go from here? So we want this objective, the new objective, to be as measurable and specific as possible. We want it to be like what's required. Is there a due date? Is there a timeline? What does that look like? And then we want to make sure it's complete, that we're not building in any loopholes. So the example I like to share is like, we had an employee who actually was on a call on a meeting like this, a webinar, not a webinar, but a meeting. And we had an executive team member in the meeting, and one of the team members like spouted off and got really negative. And the leader stepped in and did some corrective behavior with this employee later, but said, like, when there's an executive team member on the call, you can't act like this, right? You need to be professional. And I don't know if you caught the loophole in that, but it was like, oh, if there's an executive member on the team or on the call, then I can't act like this. But if there's not somebody like that, then I can, right? And so you have to be careful that we're not creating these loopholes where they're like, oh, well, only under these circumstances I need to behave this way or not behave this way. So just be aware of that sometimes those can creep up. And so it's helpful to have somebody else look at what your objective is, or and get a second opinion for sure in that space. So let's go back to Bob. So what do we want that to look like? Here's the expectation, right? We know he's supposed to be at his desk ready to work. Facts are he was late yesterday, today, and then 3 days last week. So what's the outcome? When you're late, Bob, and he works in a call center, the call queues get full and we all start the day behind. So it's imperative that you get here on time every day, right? So at this point, Bob hasn't said anything. I've been the talker. Here's your expectation, Bob. Here's where you're not meeting that expectation. And this is why this is important. And this is what I expect going forward, right? That's the new objective. And the objective is the same as the expectation. We're just going to reiterate that. Okay. Now, as you can guess, the next part of this equation is S for solutions. So how are we going to overcome this issue or concern? So S is for solutions. So this is a space where, as leaders or managers, this is the time that we're going to be the coach. We're going to step in and say, okay, what needs to change? How can we help? And this is really should be the first time Bob gets to say anything. And we want his suggestions on how are we going to prevent this from happening, right? And they're just options. We're going to discuss them, and they don't need to be super complex. I have had, when I first learned this is so funny. When I first learned this from another HR leader, she uses this example about somebody being late, and she said, and I had a team member who was late, and they decided they would take turns calling this team member every morning at like 6 a.m. to make sure this team member was up and awake so that he could get to work on time. And I share this story as I'm doing this training, and I had a leader, I kid you not, about a year ago be like, oh my gosh, we did the same thing. We decided we would take turns calling this individual. And I don't know, I hope you're laughing because that seems ridiculous. The solutions are not for us as leaders. The solutions are for the employee. This is what they are going to do, the behaviors that they're going to change, that they're going to implement. It's not us, it's them. Okay, so what I want you to think about, what are different types of solutions that could be implemented just in general, overarching things. What if we have a performance issue or a misstep or whatnot, we have people not conforming to policy, how could we help them change? What would be some solutions? Not us, what could they do to have a solution to prevent that problem? So again, throw your thoughts in chat. What are some different types of solutions that could be implemented? Again, just in general. Set an alarm. For Bob, absolutely. But just not even just in this situation, but just, which is definitely a good one, but just performance management overall. Yep. Bob could track his time so he could see, yep, when he's late. Could we adjust Bob's start time? Yeah, we definitely could. Right? Because if Bob chimes in and he's like, well, if it works for the company, you're exactly right, Amy. Because in some cases it doesn't, right? That couldn't be a thing, but it could be one of those solutions. It could also be, I mean, maybe if it's not on time, but maybe if it's a performance issue, maybe it's some retraining. Maybe Bob needs to do a job shadow. Maybe Bob needs to move to a different team. Maybe he doesn't actually have the skill set that we need him to have for his job if he's not able to meet the expectations. Maybe he's not a good fit for the company, right? Unfortunately, those are not always the solutions we're looking for, but they're definitely options, because we want to make sure that he is successful. We want to do everything we can to make sure that Bob is successful, not only in his role, but definitely in his career within the organization. And if that means a shift or a change, then that could definitely be a solution. So, but yeah, if Bob's like, well, here's the deal, I have to take my kids to the bus shows up at 8:05. And if it's, cold weather, or if there's not another parent, I don't like leaving my children there. So I wait, that makes me late. So sometimes there's another parent and I can leave, right? And then we can say, okay, well, then let's work out something different, right? Maybe we can adjust that. Or he needs to work that out, not we, but him, right? Maybe he needs to partner with another parent, or maybe again, we can change his start time if that's something that's applicable. So, okay, so as for solutions, so we could say, right after we've done everything, so why are you late, and what can you do to get here on time? That could be part of the script, right? Bob talks, you talk, we talk back and forth, we come to an agreement on a solution. And again, it's not that Bob is, we're not going to take on the accountability. And I hear this a lot where there's a lot of we in this space. We will work toward, getting you training. We, right? Which I love that servant leadership perspective. But if we're not clear, Bob's going to leave this conversation and he thinks the we is me, and I'm going to do these things versus what is he going to do. So we want to be clear that we're saying, this is going to be your responsibility, Bob. This is what I need you to do going forward. This is what you're going to do going forward. So as much as we love the we, it shows up in the solutions, and the ownership of who's going to do what gets blurred pretty quickly. So be just aware that that can show up there. But as you can see, we've built a really nice script so far. Bob, you're expected to be at your desk ready to work by 8 a.m. every day that you're scheduled. You were late today, yesterday, and 3 days last week. When you're late, it causes the call queue to get full, and we start the day behind. It affects the whole team. So it's imperative that you're here on time every day. So help me understand why you're late. What are we going to do going forward? What are you going to do going forward to be here on time? Bob talks, I talk, we agree. Okay, that sounds like a great thing. And then we're going to apply the last piece, which is actions. And the action is really about it's a couple different things, but what are we doing right now? What kind of document are we doing? Bob, this is just going to be your first written warning, and I'm going to put it in your file, right? It could just be that. If we also want to document or talk about what happens in the future. If this behavior doesn't change, then what happens? What actions, the actions that may be taken in the future could also include, I'm going to check in with you every day or every couple days. And I'm going to, right, if we're talking about maybe a performance expectation, right? We talked about how many widgets an hour, and I'm going to check in with you. If it's like, okay, in 30 days, if you're not making 8 widgets an hour, then, we're going to have this conversation again. But you don't wait until day 29 from here, right, to check on whether there's been a shift or a change. There's nothing at that point we can do. That becomes a very lagging measure. And so we're going to maybe build in some space where we're going to talk to Bob every couple of days and see how things are going. And we're going to set up some training and some job shadowing, right? Those are all the things that are going to happen in the future. And we're going to document that so that we can have a list that we can follow and reference. Then we're going to talk about what's going to happen if it doesn't change. Are we going to find ourselves back here in 30 days with this same conversation? And we're going to call that a second written warning or a final documentation. Or is it like, hey, if this happens again, sometimes it's the behavior is egregious enough that we're like, if this happens again, we're done, right? So if we have this conversation again, then we're going to be talking termination, right? But you want to make sure that they're clear and they understand what is expected. So you might even say we've circled back to expectations here. We also want to talk about, right, if the behavior changes, if you do improve and this doesn't happen again, what happens, right? This goes in your file and in 6 months it disappears. Or we never have to talk about it again. I'm not going to hold this over your head, but right, if this behavior surfaces again, because really performance management is all about establishing behavior, right? Or patterns of behavior. If it's going to be repeated, we're going to want to have this somewhere. So let them know that, yeah, if it repeats, this will come back up. If it doesn't, if the behavior changes, then we're done with it. We never have to talk about it again. All right, any questions about actions and maybe even solutions? The chat is open, so feel free to just jump in at any point if you have any questions. So if we get to back to our scenario, so we have our expectation, we've talked about the facts, we know the objective and what we expect from Bob going forward. The solutions we've now implemented, whatever that looks like. Maybe Bob and I agreed that he would work with a neighbor and they'll be sure to be there every morning with the kids because he needs to be on time, right? And he's going to be on time. He agreed, we're good to go. So this is what I say to Bob. This is your first written warning. If you're late again, I'll proceed with a second written warning. If you're on time from here on out, this will expire in 60 days, right? Pretty clear, right? But this is fully documented, right? If I follow this and I'm writing out these paragraphs or these sections, I have a full, complete, um, essentially really well written warning about what's going on, what are those behaviors, and then what's going to happen going forward. I one time had a manager in my office very frustrated with a team member, and he was just like this and this, and there was this and this, and I was like, hold on, we got to narrow this down. So we started through this formula, and I started to say, well, what's expected? And even just in that conversation, what's expected, and then we got to some facts. We were able to pinpoint a behavior that actually held some water, I guess you could say. It was something that we could hold them accountable to versus just these feelings and emotions and perceptions. And so this is also helpful if you're coaching other leaders or even yourself to sit down and think about what's expected. Okay, when are they not hitting those expectations? What are those facts that I have to support that? That can help really clarify and give some pointed direction to how you're going to address the behavior issues and how you're going to instill accountability within that group. So that is it's a great tool just for ourselves in some space. So expectations, facts, objectives or outcomes, solutions, and actions. That is EFOSA. And if you can never remember EFOSA, it kind of sounds like Mufasa, right? Not really, but I love it. And I used to carry it. I used to have it on a sticky note on I kept it on my screen, and I would write it. And over time, I eventually just got it, and it becomes a tool that is really, really useful to make sure that you're holding your team members accountable. You're getting an accounting of the behaviors that are meeting or not meeting those expectations. So this is a weird webinar where everyone's really quiet. So I got through everything really fast. So we're not going to go a whole hour, but I do want to give you some space for, oh, Amy, good question. So if this is used as a warning, what's the difference for a PIP? Honestly, it's really about the documentation and then what are the consequences, right? So a warning could look exactly the same as a PIP, but the warning is, right, the step one, and then the PIP is the next step, or whatever it looks like within your organization. A PIP is, though, also more of a performance improvement plan. And so it's going to be heavily focused on, I would say, the solutions. What are we going to do to improve the performance? What are the things that are needed, and that becomes the driver, really, is how we're going to change this behavior. And honestly, I feel like everyone in the world should be on a PIP. We all should be improving our performance if that's really truly what it's used for. Some companies make it part of their disciplinary process, if you will, versus a development process. So it really doesn't necessarily matter. But I think the IFOSA formula is great for all of the steps. It's even great for a termination. Honestly, you're not going to get past, right, the first, oh, so here's the expectations, Bob. You were late, and you know you're not supposed to. Here's all the times you were late, and the outcome is you no longer work here, right? End of story. You don't have to beat around the bush, and it doesn't. And right, our leaders who are like, well, I don't know what to say, and they're like, well, Bob, you're just a great employee, and all of a sudden we have this feedback sandwich that, like, the corrective behavior is a teeny slice of cheese in the middle, right, of all this other stuff, and they were lost and confused. So it allows us to be really clear and give that directive, and what's needed, that behavior is addressed very clearly. And so EFOSA is really great anytime. It doesn't even have to be a formal. It could just be giving feedback. It could just be a coaching, but like, here's what I expect and here's what I'm seeing, right? Is that how you think and feel, right? What is your perspective? And then you can work through solutions. So I hope that helps. That's a great question, Amy. Thank you. Any other questions? I want you to find the what is it? The reactions, and I want you to give me a reaction how you feel about EFOSA. Is it good? Is it bad? Was it helpful? Do you like it? Good. Okay, I got a thumbs up. I got a heart face. Good. I like it. Some people are paying attention. Great. Okay. Any questions at all about this tool or performance management? Great. Well, then with that, just thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Amy, good question. Do you have suggestions on how to document? Well, that is really going to be dependent on within your organization. I worked in organizations where we had in our HRS system, we had a place to create documents. Otherwise, absolutely a Google Doc or a Word doc saved in a folder, anywhere that you want to do that. We at my one of my last organizations, we did our documented discussion form kind of followed EFOSA. They put a couple together so that it was not like 6 sections or 5, it was just 3. So you could follow that however you wanted to, and it doesn't have to be labeled. I mean, I wouldn't say to your team members, okay, I'm going to give you an EFOSA right now, right? That sounds weird. And my kids always loved it when I talked HR, but they would be like, are you going to do that formula thing on me? And I'd be like, no, I'm not. Anyway, but I would, but you can just create a sentence structure that follows those things. And if it's not in that perfect order, that's fine too, whatever is comfortable for you or for your organization. But you certainly want it to be documented where that you can get to it, but your team members or your employees can't. But that you can have it as you need it for sure. So, and I would include dates and times in those facts. That's always important to get as much detail in that space as possible, dates and times and even if you sent it in an email, right? You typed it out, you followed this formula, you typed it out, you sent an email to them as like, here's a summary of what our conversation is. That could be your documentation, making sure that they reply and say, yes, I agree, this is what we talked about. Not necessarily that they agree with what you talked about, but yes, this is what you did have the conversation around. So definitely that thing. So, all right. Well, hopefully you are registered for our session next month. It is, as Rod said at the beginning, on December 1st, same time, same bat channel, same bat time, for those of you who know old Batman. So, all right. And if you need us, you know where to find us. Thanks, you all. Have a great week. Have a good Monday.